kind of interesting that the time of year when we usually have inversions is the same time of year that the legislature is in session. Hi everybody, welcome to the county seat today. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Now, I'm not drawing any parallels or linkages here. I'm just saying that when we have our worst air is the time when our lawmakers are meeting so they can do something about it. And they have paid quite a bit of attention over the last few years. Today we're going to talk to the director of the Department of Environmental Quality about what Utah's done, what the new administration in Washington might have as a way of impact on us, and what our goals and targets are. But first we want to start with a little bit of background on just why Utah's air is the way that it is.
There is one atmospheric event in Utah that you can annually count on in our long-range forecast with over 95% accuracy. That is the inversion. The inversions are as much a part of the narrative here in Utah as any part of our history. And surprisingly, they can be tracked all the way back to statehood. Utah has three basins that predictably bring about noteworthy inversions: the Wasatch Front, Cache Valley, and the Uinta Basin. An inversion occurs when a high-pressure area with warmer air moves over a valley with cold air in the bottom.
When we see the very highest concentrations during the wintertime is when we have snow on the ground. So we get a good big storm event. We get 8 to 10 inches of snow on the ground, and then a high pressure moves in and brings warm air over the top of that. Because the valley floor is cold, with the snow there, it's reflective. It doesn't heat up and mix. That's when we see the lid go on the valley, and everything we put into the valley during that time stays with us until the next storm comes in. It's a circumstance that we were dealt. We don't have much choice to fix that part, but we can control what we put into the air.
Summertime inversions usually are not driven by particulate pollution, but rather ozone buildup. Many people think that our overall air quality is bad most of the year. However, the number of days where we are out of compliance with federal guidelines is relatively small, even though those are technically bad days.
So on average, about 5% of the days each year, so about 18 days a year, we don't comply with the current federal standards.
In fact, if the Wasatch Front were moved lock, stock, and barrel to Kansas where there are no valleys, we would have air cleaner than most American cities.
When we look at our average emissions, so compared to other metropolitan areas, we're actually quite low. We have made great progress. We compare very favorably with the other metropolitan areas. It is the topography that traps the pollution that they don't have to deal with, but we do.
While headlines over the last 40 years have brought attention to legions of new regulations and plans to reduce pollution, people still wonder why we seem to have just as many days that trigger an alert for air quality despite our efforts to clean the emissions from our cars, factories, and make our homes more efficient. Well, in truth, we have improved it quite a bit. You see, while the amount of pollution keeps going down due to our collective efforts, so too does the threshold for non-attainment. Today's allowable standard for air quality is only 20% of what was allowable in 1986. So in essence, we have reduced particulate pollution by around 80%. That doesn't mean that anyone is backing off the clean air pedal, however, as Utah faces a population expected to double in the next 40 years. We will need and can do much more.
I hope this complicated issue is a little more clear now. When we come back, Chad will go into more details during the roundtable discussion. From the county seat, I'm Malia Stringham.
Thanks, Malia. I really appreciate your report. Now we have an understanding of what unique features make the air the way it is in Utah. It's time to look at what we've done and where we're headed, and we'll do that right after we come back from this commercial break.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time. in Bryce Canyon country.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Welcome back to the county seat. Joining us for our conversation today is Alan Matheson, who's the Executive Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. Alan, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, particularly like in the legislative season, to spend some time to talk with us.
Well, this is important, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
So, you know, every year we go through this cycle. We have inversions in the winter. We have a couple of bad ones in the summer, at least ones that at least get the traffic signs going. And people don't pay much attention to it otherwise. Has anything really significantly changed in how the state addresses air quality in the last, say, 5 years?
Yeah, and it's important to note, listen, air quality is important. It affects all of us. Yeah. It's our health, our concern for our families, our economy, quality of life, the pride that we have in our state. So there is a commitment to address the air quality challenges. And in fact, I think the record's pretty good. If you look over the last roughly 10 years, we've added about 600,000 people to the state population, 20% increase. But we've reduced our overall emissions 30%. So that's about a 46% per capita reduction in emissions. So something's working. Now that doesn't mean we're where we need to be. We know that Utah's air quality is generally pretty good. 95% of the days on average we meet the federal health standards. But there are these roughly 17, 18 days a year where we don't, and that's too many. So there's an effort to reduce that. And if you look at what's happened over the last few years, there have been new standards applied to industry, requiring that they put the best technologies on their plants to reduce emissions. We've had 30 new regulations that are addressing kind of area sources, homes, small businesses, et cetera, trying to find a balance that allows us to reduce emissions without putting too much strain on a small business. There's been the UCARE program that the governor started that's putting out public education information, how people can take steps to reduce their emissions.
How's that working?
It's working really well. I think anybody that has watched TV and seen any of the weather reports have seen the UCARE logo. People are getting educated on things they can do in their lives to reduce pollution. Not idling as much, not driving as much, turning down their thermostat, et cetera. There's been a lot that's been done with renewable energies. You can see that Utah has been among the leaders in the nation in increasing solar resources over the last couple of years. I think 800 new megawatts over this past year.
Are most of those done like on an individual home-by-home basis, or are we talking about some large projects as well?
Well, that 800 megawatts I'm talking about is utility scale. So those are the large projects that generate power for the grid. Mm-hmm. That's not including what's happening on homes.
Okay, yeah. So I didn't mean to distract you from the other accomplishment.
No, that's fine, but the state's trying to take a lead and set an example. So we're cleaning our state vehicle fleet. The governor's required each of the state agencies to develop plans to reduce travel. There's a new employee that works with each of the agencies of state government to take actions to improve air quality, anti-idling requirements. and more. So there are good things happening. More needs to be done.
So when we look at this, every time I have a conversation, and occasionally you'll see social media, like two people will just kind of explode back and forth on this, and it's like the guys that are defending their cars are blaming industry, and the guys that are business owners are blaming the cars, and this fight just goes on back and forth. Are we advancing on all of those playing fields?
We have to. Pointing fingers doesn't solve the problem. So the reality is we have to make progress in all of these sectors, and we are. The state plan targets industry, it targets the area sources, our homes, buildings, restaurants, small businesses, et cetera, and it targets automobiles and fuels. And in fact, we're working very hard to bring cleaner cars, cleaner fuels into the region.
Excellent, excellent. This is a good place to take a break. We'll turn our attention to what lies ahead and what some of the bills are, changes in Washington, when we come back on the County Seat.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
One more, here we go again. I tell myself I'm not in love, but one more time is not enough. One last kiss and then you were gone, and I'm here wishing you could stay a little longer. Stay a little longer. Wishing you could stay a little longer.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We're talking about air quality in Utah with Alan Matheson from the Department of Environmental Quality. As we left to the break, you had talked about a whole string of things that the state's been engaged in. I would like to kind of target what you think the one biggest accomplishment of the state has been in the tenure of the time that you've been there.
I think there are a number of things that have happened, and really the strategy to address air pollution requires lots of little things. There aren't silver bullets, but there are some things that have made a difference. And one of those is research. A lot of the Clean Air Act and the EPA standards are based on research that was done in California or the East Coast, and Utah's situation is different because of our topography and the chemistry that creates the pollution in the air. We need to understand what happens here in our atmosphere so that we can target actions that make the biggest difference at the lowest cost. The legislature's been good about funding some of that research over the last few years. And that really is making it possible for us to develop effective strategies, not just looking at what others have done.
Can you actually find, balance becomes part of it. If you were to take like Chicago's EPA standards and apply them here and had to comply with their regulations, or is that to say that those regulations might not get the same bang for the buck than they would if we built them ourselves?
Yeah, so there are national standards that set the targets that we have to hit. Mm-hmm. But under this process of collaborative federalism that's set up under the Clean Air Act, EPA is supposed to let the states develop strategies to reach those standards. Sometimes they micromanage a little more than we'd like, but for the most part, as we get good information about Utah's atmosphere and Utah's situation and can understand Utah's social dynamics and political dynamics, we can develop programs that are more tailored to get the job done here.
So let me kind of shift this to a different kind of conversation. What is, as we're in the legislative session, are there any big tweaks going on this session, or are there some small ones? What is the legislative climate about air quality?
So I think there's a general concern about air quality in the legislature, and there have been some steps that have been taken the last few years that have made a difference. One of those has been a bill passed last year to require that beginning in 2018, only ultra-low NOx water heaters will be sold in Utah. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but you think about the millions, literally, of water heaters in the state, each of them with a flame that's creating some emissions. These new water heaters will reduce nitrogen oxide emissions by 70%. That'll make a big difference in our community at very little cost, if any. As we look at this session, really the biggest issues are in terms of appropriations. We've got a request for air quality monitors. We want to make sure that we've got monitors that are up to date, in the right places, so that people know what the air quality is in their area. They can make decisions about when they exercise, and we can get better information about our compliance. So that's a big one. Another is a project that we're hoping to fund in the Uinta Basin. There's a lot of oil and gas development out there. It's good for the economy of the state, but it does create an air quality challenge. So we're looking for some appropriations that would allow us to get infrared cameras that allow you to see through the camera leaks in the system. So in cooperation with industry, with local governments out there, we're trying to come together and say, let's just go out. If we see a leak, you can make the quick little fix. It's non-regulatory, but it can make a real difference in our community. So those are some things that we're really targeting.
So, turning it to it nationally, there, again, back to social media, I have heard a lot of people in a state of panic saying that with our new administration, the EPA is going to roll back to where it was 30 or 40 years ago, or when they first founded it. I believe that was in the Nixon administration when the EPA came to life, and that we're going to go back to that standard. Give us an enlightened answer to that.
Well, I'm not sure we fully know what's going to happen in coming months with the new administration. My sense is that they will be more ready to listen to the states and some of the challenges that we're facing. But we do have a Clean Air Act that's been passed. It establishes some requirements on states and on EPA. My guess is that that won't change dramatically or anytime soon. Just to let people know what's happening in Utah in terms of the regulatory structure. You might have been reading in the papers that EPA is proposing to change the Wasatch Front from being a moderate non-attainment area to being a serious non-attainment area. Some people get worried. They think that means that the air is getting worse. In fact, the air is getting much better. But by operation of law, because we didn't meet the standard by the end of 2015, we're automatically kicked up to a serious non-attainment area. That means that we have to develop over this next year a state plan to come into compliance by the end of 2019. It's not a lot of time. And if we fail to meet that standard, then again, by operation of law, we're subject to what's called most stringent measures. That means we would have to put in here the most stringent controls and measures that are used anywhere else in the country, regardless of cost. That's a heavy hammer that would impact our economy and industry and others. So we want to meet the standard, and frankly, we're pretty close. So this new plan that we'll be developing over the next year will take input from the public. We'll look at the research that's been done so that we can target strategically those efforts that will make a difference, and collectively try to come up with a plan that'll get us into compliance. Now, I think we can do that. Compliance is based on a 3-year rolling average. The last period of time was 2013 to 2015. 2013 was a terrible year for inversions, and we had about 40 days that were over the standard. 2014, 2015 have been pretty good. 2016 was pretty good. So we're getting to a point where we're in the target range.
Isn't that really, though, kind of a roll of the dice that because you're so weather dependent on this, that you could get thrown into the most critical thing just by a weather pattern that comes in and sticks for a couple of years? It almost seems unfair.
It does, and it's a real challenge. 2012, we had no exceedances of the federal standard. 2013, almost 40. And it is weather dependent, but we can't control the weather. So what we can control is our emissions. We look at ways that we can reduce our contribution to air pollution in thoughtful, reasonable, practical ways. You don't want to interfere with people's freedom, quality of life, create great expense. So we really are trying to have a targeted, collaborative effort to do what makes sense here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can see some extremes. You put a 5-day curfew on people and make them stay home, you know.
Right. And it's not going to happen. We have to live our lives.
Yeah.
We have to conduct business and keep the economy going. So I think people are stepping up. Our industry has stepped up and in some cases voluntarily put on new controls. We're looking very hard at Tier 3 fuels in cars. The newer cars that are coming in are so much cleaner, and if people would look for a new car that has a smog rating of 8 or higher, that's significantly cleaner than even the newest cars we've bought in the last few years. We're trying to bring Tier 3 fuel into Utah, which is low sulfur fuel that would be much cleaner, and the combination of the new cars and the new fuel could reduce automobile emissions by 80% over the next 10 years or so.
Wow.
That makes a huge difference for us. So those are targets.
Excellent. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back here on the county seat. Our conversation with Alan Matheson from the Department of Environmental Quality. We'll be right back.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
Hills Mall offers more than just shopping. Bring the whole family and enjoy Sequest Interactive Aquarium to feed the fish and exotic birds, hold live reptiles, and even swim with the stingrays. Or pump up the action and visit Dartside, Utah's premier soft foam dart tag arena. And don't forget the Great Room Escape, where you can challenge your friends to solving mysteries inside themed rooms. So come and experience great fun at the Layton Hills Mall and visit playindavis.com for other great activities.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking with Alan Matheson today from the Department of Environmental Quality. I guess one of the biggest things in the news is Volkswagen caught cheating, and as a benefit, the state gets, I think, about $32 million in a settlement.
That's right. We expect to get a little over $32 million in the first phase, and there may be a little more that'll bring it up to $35 million. And the consent decree under that settlement sets out various things the state can do to reduce diesel emissions. And so over the course of the next month or so, we're going to be working with a stakeholder group and identify strategies to clean up or replace heavy polluting diesel vehicles. Might be old school buses, might be old locomotive engines, things like that. There's also an opportunity under that settlement to develop an electric vehicle infrastructure. And that's something the state's been focusing on, not just under that Volkswagen settlement, but through some other grants. And the Office of Energy Development is looking right now at creating a corridor from the airport down through our 5 national parks that would support a charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. And the governor, a month or so ago, stood with his counterparts in Colorado and Nevada talking about creating an electric vehicle corridor through the West. So the market's driving toward cleaner vehicles. Many are looking at electric vehicles. We want to make sure we've got an infrastructure in place that will help address it.
Would that infrastructure have to have both Tesla and normal electric cars? Because I know their hookups are a little different.
It'll be hookups that'll address the standardized cars, meaning all of them.
Right.
So we'll do that. But, you know, as we said, about half of the pollution that we see is from automobiles. That's declining with the turnover of the older fleet, but the average car in Utah is about 12 years old. So we've still got some highly polluting vehicles out there. As we transition, we're going to see automobile emissions reduced by almost half in the next few years. That'll be a big part of it. We still face the headwinds of growth. Utah is a fast-growing state, and with more people comes more driving, more cars, more pollution from our homes, etc. So all of us need to take responsibility, do our part to try to reduce our contribution to the emissions, and do it for the health of ourselves, our families, for the health of our economy, and for the great quality of life that we have in Utah.
Excellent. And what we're doing, you think, applies to both the Wasatch, Uinta Basin, and Cache Valley?
Yes. I mean, there are different issues in all of those areas, but a lot of the strategies are similar. We're targeting specific strategies in the areas where it'll make a difference.
Excellent. Alan, thank you so much for taking your time
Happy to
today.
be here.
And thank you for inviting us into your home every week on the county seat. Remember, share this with your friends. Local government is where your life happens. Become involved, be part of the solution, and we will look for you next week on the county seat. Thank you for joining us.